So I'm not a Trump supporter, right? I don't like the guy, but I feel like I'm stating certain facts to you.
Mhm.
Sorry for the harshness here, but I'm telling you, I think it's a fact that Trump would give lower taxes. You can disagree or agree whether it's good for the
Oh,
country. I think it's a fact about the gas thing. And I also think you're accepting that it is a fact that there was some degree of cover up with COVID. And I,
yeah.
I feel like your response is the same kind of hand waviness that you'd expect a Trump supporter. If I told a Trump supporter Trump stole the election, they would do some amount of hand waving to say, no, he didn't. Look at Biden or look at this, or it's not that bad. And I want to challenge you right now and say that with regards to the COVID cover up, which it seems like there was something, I don't know the totality of it. It seems like something sketchy happened. And you're
Mhm.
saying Fauci was under pressure. Doesn't it feel like maybe you're doing the same kind of deflecting that you'd accuse
Oh,
Republicans of doing?
and it's possible that the reasons I'm producing right now w- will seem to be mere deflection on scrutiny. So if I were to, perhaps I could learn more about COVID cover up or lab release cover up and come to realize that my attempts to brush aside the conspiracy thinking is incorrect or unwise. But I have not seen that yet. I've not seen anything that would suggest a COVID conspiracy.
Sure. But the Hunter Biden thing, that was thought to be a conspiracy theory, and Hunter Biden was just found guilty, right?
He was found guilty of of issuing a false statement on a form he filed when he applied for a gun.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's a felony. So that by the way, I'm not pro conspiracy theory. I actually take a big problem with people who espouse conspiracy theories. My point is that in the same way we don't like conspiracy theorists, we ourselves shouldn't be conspiracy theorists. Like there are people, on both sides, right? If you refuse to believe that Hunter Biden did anything wrong because you think it's just the right propagating some conspiracy theory, then ironically, you're the conspiracy theorist because Hunter Biden was guilty. Thank you so much for rejoining me today.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. It's nice to be back.
Andy Norman became very popular when he published his book in 2021, Mental Immunity. He was featured on the Joe Rogan Show, David Pakman, Michael Shermer, and several other popular publications. Andy, what advice do you have for people that want to make the best decision in this upcoming presidential election? How do we
Mhm.
know that we're thinking out of logic and not out of emotion or out of a mind virus?
Yeah, you're asking wonderful questions, Jake, and none of them lend themselves to easy answers.
Yeah.
But look, I would say a couple things to your listeners about the upcoming election. Number one is it's hugely important. The the two candidates on offer, two main candidates anyway, have radically different visions for our nation. And don't let yourself believe that it doesn't matter that the two parties are both equally bad. That's a fallacy of called false equivalence, and I don't think that's true. So reconcile yourself to the need to step up as a democratic citizen and cast your vote, and ideally get some of your more thoughtful and reflective friends to vote as well. That's the second thing I would say. I think so. I just read a very good article about the role Christian nationalism, which is an idea that America is fundamentally a Christian country and that Christianity ought to be the official religion of America and that the government should be used to reinforce Christian orthodoxies. This idea is now central to the platform that the Republican Party is putting forward and that they plan to implement if they retake the White House. As a free thinker who doesn't like orthodoxies of any kind, I think this would be an absolute disaster for America. So I would urge your listeners to, even if you don't like what the Democratic Party is offering, get out and vote for them anyway, because on the scale of evils in this world, it is far from the worst.
And what do you think is the worst part about the Republican Party?
I think its unquestioning fealty to Donald Trump is really terrifying. I'm watching a documentary right now about Hitler's rise to power, and I know it can sound histrionic and overblown to compare the two. but the parallels are real and they're ominous.
What do you say to the people? There are educated, smart, successful people who want to vote for Donald Trump, and they don't seem to have any unconscious drive or hidden motive for voting for him. They claim they want to vote for him because he's tougher on the border, tougher on international trade. He has lower taxes. He's more pro business, more pro capitalism, pro America first, has tariff laws, is stricter with Iran, is more likely to make peace in the Middle East and with Russia and Ukraine, is better at managing China. Like I just rattled off like a dozen of the 2 dozen reasons. There are people who claim that they have a dozen or 2 dozen valid reasons to vote for him. I don't know if those are valid or not. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very easy to line up the reasons to support whatever your gut tells you. So if you develop a visceral or dislike for one side in the culture war, basically your need to be on on the side of the angels, your need to feel as though you're on team truth and team justice, your need to feel that way will cause you to think of many reasons why your party is the right one and why the other party is out to lunch. But psychologists understand very well what's going on here. It's tribal thinking is warping the way we see
Well,
reality.
are those reasons not valid though? If you take the reasons at face value, it's true, for example, that he'd have lower taxes. Like that's probably true. It's true, for example, that he would enable the US to pump more gas than the Democrats would. Now you can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but both of those are facts, right? And they're not a result of some kind of bias that we have.
Yeah,
If
no, I think each of the points you make, I'm willing to concede that each of the points you make has some truth to it. I do think Trump is likely to be harder on to defend our southern border more vigorously, um, and there are some reasons to think that our nation needs that kind of thing. If you if you're not worried that drilling more oil will accelerate climate change, and you like the idea of being able to refill your gas tank for 50 cents less a gallon, then yes, it would seem as though voting for Trump is a good idea. Or the
or at
reason
least at least a rational idea. Not necessarily a good idea, but a rational idea.
rational in the sense that it makes sense given certain assumptions. Yes.
Yeah, rational meaning that someone could vote for him for reasons, for rational reasons. You could
Ah,
debate the morality of it or whether it makes sense or whether they should prioritize the climate over gas prices, but that's a question over should, not over whether they're making a rational decision. I can decide that I want to eat pizza because it tastes good and I like things that taste good. It's not good for me, but it's rational to eat pizza because I've decided that what I value is the taste of the food. You can't say it's irrational unless I were to say that what I prioritize is my health. So my point is that given someone's motive, there are rational reasons to vote for Trump. That's my point.
yes, I would agree that there are almost always reasons and valid reasons on, but I think it's different. But being able to cite reasons for something and the thing being reasonable itself are very different things. So imagine that you have three relatively strong reasons for doing something, but you pay no attention whatever to the 50 really even stronger reasons why you shouldn't. Sure, you have reasons for doing it, but it would not be a wise or rational thing to do.
But how can you say if I just rattled off close to a dozen purported reasons why someone would vote for Trump, how are you able to so easily push them to the side and say, of course you can find reasons for someone if you have a mind bug? How do you know that each of the 12 reasons I gave, from international policy to taxes to gas to demeanor, frank, to all the border, how do you know that those are not legitimate, important reasons why you, Andy Norman, should also vote for Trump?
Yeah. So if it sounds like I'm sweeping aside a dozen reasons casually and without due consideration, that's a fair criticism. I don't mean to be weighing them all up and giving each and every one of them their due at the moment, in this particular moment. But I think I could, if we examine them one after another, I think I could explain quite clearly why I think no one of those reasons is particularly compelling reason to vote for Trump. So that would be a longer conversation, right? I mean, if you want to try to get to the bottom of the immigration issue and the fossil fuel issue and et cetera, we should make time for those conversations. And those conversations need to be ones where we're willing to re-examine whether the assumptions we've built up over years are really right.
Your point is that broadly speaking, if you were to take the 2 hours to dig into each of those 12 reasons for voting for Trump, that you believe the conclusion would show that none of the 12 reasons are good reasons to vote for him. And what's really going on is some sort of cognitive bias or mind bug that's,
That's exactly my view, yes.
yeah.
And of course, if I were to, when I assert something like that, I'm actually taking on an obligation to provide a demonstration for that conclusion if asked. And I would do my best to provide that given the time. And
What concerns do you have about Biden being old or the fact that there could be this quote deep state, meaning long term employees in the government that are actually pulling levers? What do you make of
yeah,
that?
that I am also concerned about Biden's age. I'm concerned about Trump's age as well. Both of them are historically ancient by historical standards. I think Trump is showing more serious signs of cognitive decline. And if I had my druthers, I'd prefer that the parties have nominated younger men or younger women, maybe even better, younger women, maybe. Let's see, I'm sorry, that addressed one aspect of your question. Bring
Yeah,
me
are you
back to the
concerned
other.
about are you concerned about anything to do with the Democratic Party, whether it's the deep state
Deep state.
influence or Biden's weakness on Iran?
Yeah. So here's what I would say about those who worry about Biden and the deep state. What do we, I would ask the clarifying question: what do we mean by the deep state?
And they
Now,
would probably say the long-term government employees that are not elected.
right, and these are often called civil servants, right? People who serve at the pleasure of one administration or another, but and that have some protections against political firing. I think that the way the Republican Party is using the term deep state, and Trump in particular, he's simply going to use that term to vilify anyone who stands in his way. I think if we do have a second term with the Trump presidency, many well meaning servants are going to be hounded out of office and replaced by hacks.
Do you believe that there's a problem with the deep state?
I do think that bureaucracies grow over time and that they can become really unwieldy and inefficient in lots of ways, and that can be really difficult to bureaucracies need to be debugged too. They're complicated, messy things that function in ways that are far from optimal. So my wife is a government official here for the city in which I live, and she gets to see up close every day how the city government runs and all of the many ways in which city government can function better and should function better. She sees ways in which old fashioned thinking and career civil servants become obstructionist and become a problem. But she knows, she's wise enough to know you can't just throw out all of the babies in the bathwater and start fresh, that you actually need to do the hard work of, of changing the processes that cause good people to do inadvertently harmful things. So I think if Trump and his administration were to go into the federal government with a sort of a sledgehammer approach to what they view as the deep state and start purging people left and right, I think they'd inadvertently throw out a lot of babies with the bathwater and create dysfunction where at least we have adequate function.
Do you think that the deep state bureaucracy is in fact a problem and that something should be done?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, for many years, as a progressive, I viewed the military industrial complex as a deep state that would carry out and covert activities overseas in ways that didn't serve our country. I was profoundly worried about that. But I would urge you and your listeners, Jake, to think twice before attaching any weight to a reason that contains the words deep state. Because,
Why?
well, it's an inflammatory phrase that hints at conspirator at a conspiracy that I don't think really exists.
So you think the deep state hints at a conspiracy that doesn't really exist, but you said that bureaucracy is a problem, right?
That's right. But the idea that civil servants and bureaucrats everywhere, meet in secret and plot to subvert our democracy. I think the concept of the deep state hints at that level of corruption and malfeasance and ill intent. And I don't think that's justified given my.
What do you think about the whole Fauci thing? Fauci's part of the deep state. It turns out that he was knowledgeable about the true origins of COVID, or he may have been that it came out of a lab. And I think there's some evidence that he may have covered that up intentionally. Is that true? And if so, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I haven't followed this particular story closely. I do think that there's much more reason to think that COVID originated in a lab now than we thought during the pandemic, certainly than many progressives thought during the pandemic. Look, a lot of emotions were running high during the pandemic, and pro vaxxers and anti vaxxers were rushing to their respective battlements and ready to point fingers at the other. And it's certainly true that many of my progressive uh, colleagues were quick to dismiss or sneer at the idea of a lab leak. And we now know that hypothesis deserves far more credence than people on the left originally thought. I think Fauci himself is a well meaning person who was trying to manage a hugely volatile situation. He was trying to calm fears. He was worried about, he was trying to dampen wild conspiracy theorizing about the origins of that. In fact, one of the conspiracy theories floating around was that COVID was actually developed as a bioweapon and released into the wild by evil baddies. I hope, at least, Jake, that you would agree that's probably over the top conspiracy
Sure.
theorizing.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Probably. I see different things coming out. I rely on the news to tell me what's going on.
But imagine what it must be, what it would have been like to be Anthony Fauci in the midst of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
You've got people angrily taking sides on this issue. You've got conspiracy theories forming all over the place. You're trying to communicate good public health information with only part of the information yourself, right? Our understanding of the COVID vaccine was changing practically on a weekly basis based on what scientists were learning about it. Fauci was in a situation where he was trying to communicate the best public health information he could under conditions of serious uncertainty. And yeah, I think he made some mistakes.
So earlier in the very early beginning of the conversation, you described mind bugs and mind viruses as this idea that when presented with certain facts, people are sometimes immune to those facts because they have their own bias set in motion. So if you tell someone Trump's tried to steal the election, they'll say, "No, he didn't. He was just corralling his supporters and he didn't actually." And so they're missing the obvious truth. Even when you're telling them the facts, they have a way of subverting them. So I'm not a Trump supporter, right? I don't like the guy, but I feel like I'm stating certain facts to you.
Mhm.
Sorry for the harshness here, but I'm telling you, I think it's a fact that Trump would give lower taxes. You can disagree or agree whether it's good for the
Oh,
country. I think it's a fact about the gas thing. And I also think you're accepting that it is a fact that there was some degree of cover up with COVID. And
yeah.
I feel like your response is the same kind of hand waviness that you'd expect a Trump supporter. If I told a Trump supporter Trump stole the election, they would do some amount of hand waving to say, no, he didn't. Look at Biden or look at this, or it's not that bad. And I want to challenge you right now and say that with regards to the COVID cover up, which it seems like there was something, I don't know the totality of it. It seems like something sketchy happened. And you're
Mhm.
saying Fauci was under pressure. Doesn't it feel like maybe you're doing the same kind of deflecting that you'd accuse
Well,
Republicans of doing?
and it's possible that the reasons I'm producing right now will seem to be mere deflection on scrutiny. So if I were to, perhaps I could learn more. I would learn more about COVID cover up or lab release cover up, and come to realize that my attempts to brush aside the conspiracy thinking is incorrect or unwise. But I have not seen that yet. I've not seen anything that would suggest a COVID conspiracy. I think there was a big, messy public health apparatus that was, for the most part, doing its best to. And of course, it gets really complicated when you have companies like Pfizer and Moderna who are producing vaccines they're making billions of dollars
Yeah.
from vaccines. And of course, it's reasonable to ask questions about their motives.
Yeah.
And
And I hope I'm not spewing a conspiracy theory. And I wish I was more of an expert on this because then I could hold firmer to what I'm saying. But basically, Andy, I've seen articles and I've just seen in podcasts from what seem like reputable people, like smart people, like the All In podcast, who are a diverse set of hosts and they all have different political views. And they've all converged on the belief that the current trials that Fauci is a part of right now and the evidence produced in those trials suggests that there was something nefarious going on. Now, I'm not a judge, I'm not the jury, I'm also not even familiar enough with the facts, but what I am saying is that I have an allergy, as you've said, to that idea. For years, I thought anyone who said that COVID was anything other than the result of some natural epidemic, that they were a conspiracy theorist. But now that I'm hearing this from what seem like reputable sources, I'm being forced to contend with what I previously accepted. And
well, Jake, I would say that if you're perusing what appears to be responsibly generated content about this and it's forcing you to rethink, I think that's a sign of rationality in you. I have not been following the All In podcast, and perhaps if I did and made myself more familiar with the details, I would be persuaded that there was, in fact, something nefarious going on. But I'll have to suspend judgment until I've learned more.
but also to your point is we would there haven't been any big headlines. Like if it were true definitively that Fauci was behind some conspiracy, surely that would be a headline. Surely you would have seen that in the New York Times.
And this is true of conspiracies generally, which is that if they involve lots of conspirators, it's the more conspirators are involved, the more likely it is somebody will spill the beans, right? Or that the secret will out. Many people are sucked into conspiracy theories that ultimately don't make sense on rational or evidential grounds, precisely because they posit a sinister forces that explain why things are going wrong. So if you're at a point in your life where things aren't going well and you feel desperate and treated unfairly, conspiracy theories will be extra appealing to you because they give you a story to tell that explains your victimhood or that explain why things aren't going well for you.
But likewise,
Very powerful psychological forces that conspiracy theories manipulate. And so I do think conspiracies happen, but we need to be really careful before we posit deep conspiracies because a lot of times they turn out to be not what they seem.
sure. But the Hunter Biden thing, that was thought to be a conspiracy theory and Hunter Biden was just found guilty, right?
He was found guilty of issuing a false statement on a form he filed when he applied for a gun.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's a felony. So that by the way, I'm not pro conspiracy theory. I actually take a big problem with people who espouse conspiracy theories. My point is that in the same way we don't like conspiracy theorists, we ourselves shouldn't be conspiracy theorists. Like there are people, on both sides, right? If you refuse to believe that Hunter Biden did anything wrong because you think it's just the right propagating some conspiracy theory, then ironically, you're the conspiracy theorist because Hunter Biden was guilty.
Um, that's a fair point. Yeah. So our innate tribalism causes us to see conspiracies on the other side, and it causes us to dismiss evidence that we don't like. And we could all improve in our resistance to the temptations of such fallacious thinking.
So, Andy, what do you think Elon Musk means by woke mind virus?
I think he means that a dangerous orthodoxy has spread among people on the far left that demands fealty to a certain set of sacred values and threatens to cancel people who don't subscribe to those values. There are dangerous orthodoxies metastasizing on the left, and I certainly think there are some dangerous orthodoxies metastasizing on the right. And both sides are interested in pointing fingers and saying, no, you're the one with mind bugs. But neither side at this point has the wisdom to step back and say, maybe we all have bug ridden minds. And maybe we all need to become more humble and dialogue in a spirit of openness and conciliation if we're really going to sort this out.
Does Elon Musk's conception of the woke mind virus apply only to the left, or does it also apply to the conservatives on the right?
I would argue the latter. I think mind viruses flourish. So bad ideas creep into everyone's minds. We all need to acknowledge that. So, in that simple sense, every single one of us harbors mind bugs or mind viruses. Which ones are the worst? And which mind viruses are doing the most to disorient us? That's a conversation that needs to play out over time because we're not going to get to the bottom. If Elon and I sat down tomorrow, we wouldn't be able to reach agreement on that. It would take several sessions and some real soul searching, I think, on both sides to gain common understanding.
It seems that when Elon Musk refers to the woke mind virus, he's referring just to the left and the liberals. You are saying it applies to both Democrats and Republicans. Why do you think he's only applying it to the left? Or is he only applying it to the left?
I think many are using it just opportunistically as a weapon. It's tempting to weaponize these concepts of mind virus, mind bug. It's tempting to weaponize them against our ideological opponents. But it takes more humility and more wisdom to recognize that there's truth in it that applies to ourselves as well, and that it requires us to do some serious rethinking. I'm hopeful that the concept of mind bugs and the concept of mind debugging can help us sort of transition to a society where critical thinking and compassionate reasoning together is a more common thing.
I agree with you that both sides of the political aisle suffer from some sort of bias, mind virus, orthodoxy, and lack of flexibility to see another's perspective. It seems to me that people like Elon Musk who refer to the woke mind virus are referring only to the left. Do you agree with my analysis that people like Elon Musk are only ascribing woke mind virus to the left and they're neglecting to see those same patterns that are also observable with conservatives on the right?
Absolutely. I think that's true. The few instances of his use of the phrase that have come to my attention suggest that he's very eager to apply it to the left and not at all interested in applying it to the right. I would love to find out that Elon cares enough about truth and rationality that he's willing to apply these concepts in an even-handed way.
Is it only him, or do you think a lot of people are only applying this idea of a mind virus to one side that's not their side?
I think that's the rule right now. Right, it's a concept that has, as you noted at the outset, very strongly negative connotations. So everybody wants to claim that our ideological opponents have suffer from mind infections, but nobody wants to admit that we ourselves do.
So, two questions. One is how do we ourselves prevent these mind bugs, mind viruses? And then, equally important, if we see that woke mind virus or fallacious thinking in someone else, how do we alert them of that in a way that they're likely to be not only receptive to it, but act on it?
It's the real trick, isn't it? Nobody likes to discover that they're wrong. And so pride itself is part of one of the obstacles here. And if you've ever tried to have a really deep conversation with somebody on the other end of the political spectrum or the other end of the religion secular divide, you'll know that it's very easy to trigger one another with the things you say. And nobody reasons well and dispassionately or even fair mindedly when they're triggered. So part of what we need to do is make ourselves less triggerable. We all need to work on this. And look, to the extent that Elon and people on the right point to how easily liberals get triggered by certain things, they're onto something. Because I actually think that being triggered is a kind of overreaction. It's almost like an autoimmune reaction to something that isn't as always as dangerous as it seems. Do you know how an allergy an allergy is an autoimmune overreaction to something that isn't really dangerous. If cat dander gives you uh, hay fever, that's it's not actually the dander that's making you miserable. It's your body's overreaction to the dander that's making you miserable. And I think that there's a whole lot of overreacting by partisans on both sides, in part because it's a great way to generate attention and to bring eyeballs to whatever cause or whatever platform.
So if you, Andy Norman, are experiencing what I think is a mind parasite, but you don't know it and you don't want to believe it, how do I convince you that you have a mind bug?
Yeah. So in the book that's germinating in my mind right now, I start by saying it's time we shifted the paradigm from one in which the space of ideas is a marketplace. You've heard the phrase marketplace of ideas. Embedded in that metaphor is a deep conceit that we're essentially like customers who can browse the aisles of the space of ideas and just pick out the ones we like, keep the ones we like, bypass the ones we don't, and fill up our shopping carts with whatever we darn please, because after all, it's our money. We get to spend it however we want. That's a wildly misleading characterization of our relationship to information and ideas. I want to encourage us all to think of ideas as things that can take on a life of their own and propagate through social networks in ways that cause harm as well as do good. And that if all of these are true, the space of ideas is much more like an ecosystem than it is like a marketplace. And by seeing that, you're forced to take a more humble, and I think you're forced to bring more humility to your own thinking. And that puts you in a position to actually listen to people who might have critical things to say. In fact, here's a much more concrete, practical answer to your question. I've trained myself over years to handle difficult challenges as opportunities. So they say every problem is an opportunity. Every challenge to your views is also an opportunity to learn something. And in fact, if it helps you unlearn something and shed a mind bug, it's a great gift. So, were you to ask me a really tough question about one of my ideas right now, Jake, I would make a little mental adjustment in my mind. I'd first say to myself, don't overreact. Jake's maybe seeing a mind bug that I'm blind to. He might be doing me a great favor here. Let's hear him out.
But you're saying how you as an individual can be more receptive to critical feedback. My question is not as the individual suffering from the mind bug, but as the observer. So, me, if I see this other person over there who, unlike yourself, is not going through any sort of cognitive training, how do I go to a regular, stubborn person and get them to see that their views about something are completely hijacked by an irrational idea?
Yeah. All the research suggests that you have to earn their trust first. You have to show them that you're willing to listen. So long before you get around to criticizing, you need to listen and show your capacity for compassionate understanding. So I always make a habit, for example, in my classes, to pick out what's best. So students would often hazard a philosophical theory was off base, but before I'd go anywhere close to criticizing what they'd have to say, I'd pick out something right. I know they're trying to express something, and I'd say, you know what? I think you're onto something here, and I think you're trying to express something that I agree with. And I'd maybe put it in my own words, and then say, but I also have worries about the way you put it. Tell me if this makes sense to you. So that's an example of a way in which that you're open to what they think, and always need to do that before you ask them to rethink.
How do you get rid of mind viruses? It's through individual training and through the communication strategies that you're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with just greater awareness. It has to do with creating a culture where testing each other's ideas is welcome rather than rejected as transgressive. If you look at history, there have been times in Western history where people got really uptight about the art of critical questioning, and then devastating orthodoxies took root. And we ended up in a 1,000-year dark age, in part because people got really skeezed out by the idea of tough critical question. 1,000 years of ignorance, superstition, and disease, because, and on my reading of history, largely because people got terrified by the very idea that somebody might challenge my ideas. We came out of the dark ages in part because people, a new spirit of openness to questioning and openness to criticism became normal. When that happened, an age called the Enlightenment came about, and we remade the world into a place orders of magnitude more conducive to human flourishing. In my view, precisely because we created a culture where dialogue and inquiry were celebrated and practiced rather than treated as an unwelcome thing.
Mental immunity teaches us why people reject science and why they believe online conspiracy theories, and how people can be radicalized online and even go on to commit acts of violence. So, the tough questions of why our society is so politically polarized, these ideas have never been more important as they are today. So, Andy, can you talk more about mind parasites and mental immunity and what you're hoping to address in your new book?
Sure. Yes, I wrote a book about how we can cultivate more immunity to bad ideas, basically. And in my first book, I gave bad ideas a tongue-in-cheek designation, mind parasites. But I've been thinking really hard about this since, and working with other scholars in the area. And the more I look at it, the more it seems to me that this concept of mind parasites, or as I now like to call them, mind bugs, really is worth taking much more seriously than we're inclined to. It seems like a metaphor, it seems like a playful um, thing, but I actually think there's a great deal of insight packed into the idea that our minds are actually teeming with bugs. Um, so let me pause there for a second. Jake, if I were to just drop that on you as a statement, your mind is teeming with bugs. Mine is too. If I were to drop that on you, what would you think first, and how would you feel about it?
It's scary, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is, and it's hard to think correctly when you're scared. So I think when I first heard this idea expressed by the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, he used somewhat different language, but when I first heard it, I recoiled from it. Like it seemed to me to hit way too close to home, and it seemed to me to be inappropriate use of analogy. But I've been thinking really hard about it, and if you can get past that sort of visceral disgust at the thought and start to see infectious information as something capable of behaving like a virus or a pathogen. If you can get to that point where you can view that facts like that dispassionately, you actually start to see how ideas shape our minds. And I think we might need to undergo such a transformation to really adapt to a world in which information goes viral every day.
So, what do you mean exactly that our minds are teeming with bugs?
So imagine. So one of the senses of bug here is related to the idea of software bugs. So when a software company builds a prototype of a popular piece of software, it's initially just has hundreds, or not thousands, of problems in the code. And those companies have to hire very expensive, trained software engineers to pore over that code, track down the bugs, and then replace them with code that functions better. I actually think that's a really accurate metaphor for our minds. I think our minds are like our brain's operating system. They're imperfectly designed by natural selection. They serve us pretty well under some circumstances, but actually fail us badly in others. And if we can learn to think of our own minds as buggy in the same sense in which early version software is buggy, then we bring a different attitude to the task of thinking, an attitude that goes, gee, it's possible that some mind bugs have already climbed on board here. I better be humble and careful with the way I think, because who knows? Some of these mind bugs might be distorting my thinking.
How might these affect us with the upcoming presidential election?
Yeah, I think the concept of Elon Musk has been talking about the woke virus. And many people on the right have picked up the language of mind viruses to describe views they see as spreading uh, unreasonably on the left. And many of my friends on the left actually think that infectious bad ideas are spreading on the right. And I think there's some truth to both of those claims. Ideas spread in viral ways, far more in ways that we don't like to acknowledge to ourselves. And in the viral spreading of information and ideas, our minds get shaped in the process. It's not always the case that our minds are the active agents that manipulate and change information. Information is always constantly acting on us and changing us. And although we like to think of ourselves as in the driver's seat and information and ideas are purely in the passenger seat, it's not so simple. Yeah, we actually need to learn how to view it as the other way around also.
Absolutely. So, Andy, Norman, thanks so much for the time. We're at time here. Let me stop the recording and then maybe we can just catch up for a minute.
Okay.
That works.